نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا فمن يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله ثم أما بعد السلام عليكم. It's a great honor, a great privilege as always, even to be with you under the low tech conditions that I'm currently with you. I'm still honored and I'm still looking forward to today's conversation. This is a crazy time of year, right? The times of the prayers are shifting and changing, radically as we approach spring. And so we're a little off with our timings. We'll figure out exactly how we want to address that in terms of, creating a space in which we can still have adequate conversation. But I did see that for today's topic of discussion, we wanted to look at wills. And just before I start, I want to make sure, am I being heard okay? Because this seems to me like I'm not being heard.
No, you're clear.
Okay, alhamdulillah. So we want to talk a little bit about wills. And, this is a major part of life. And by extension, this is a major part of Islamic law, but people never pay much attention to it. I don't know if it brings up uncomfortable, ideas about passing, or if people deem it impolite to talk about it, or it is something one does not discuss publicly, but rather only with their attorney, but this is something very important. And it never ceases to amaze me just how few people have, prepared, end of life matters, how few people have actually sought the consultation of an attorney or a lawyer or an estate planner or someone to help them to get these affairs in order. And this is very important. The Prophet ﷺ said in an authentic hadith, an authentic prophetic statement, that the Muslims should not sleep for 3 days except that their will is updated and known. He actually termed it under their pillow, but this was just an expression that, this is something that should be clear. And of course, making it clear is something that one does as a mercy, something that one does out of consideration for your loved ones, so that these resources, the money or the property or the jewelry or whatever else one leaves behind as a legacy, is not fought over in a violent way that leads to great tension and separation and animosity among people in families. I've seen issues over inheritance literally split families, literally divide siblings to where they don't speak to one another. When one is proactive about this and you decide to take the necessary steps to make things clear in this respect, it's a mercy, it's consideration, it's thoughtfulness for the living, right? Now, a lot of the furud, or the mandatory shares, have already been clarified by the Quran, right? Have already been clarified by the Quran. The only thing that becomes a bit contentious in this regard is that the shares of men are always double the shares of women. And the reason for that is very clear, that men in the Sharia are always assumed to bear the financial responsibility of taking care of their families. That can mean their parents, that certainly means their children, that certainly means their wives, in the conception of the Sharia. Whereas women are seen as always being the financial beneficiary of someone else's largesse, someone else's support, right? Women are always understood to have the legal right to financial support from someone in their family, a husband, if not a husband, a father, if not a father, a brother, if not a brother, an uncle, if not an uncle, a grandparent, if not a grandparent. Their financial support actually falls on the community. And you had women that were widows or women that were otherwise single. The Muslim community used to give them regular stipends out of the Beit al-Mal, out of the public funds of the community. That is not our situation. I acknowledge that. I know that this is not our situation, that women can be assumed beneficiaries of the financial support of some entity within the community. That's not our situation. And our situation does not necessarily dictate that men bear sole financial responsibility in that regard. And I think that to say we should amend or to say that we should adapt or change the laws of inheritance, I think we have to be very careful about that, because our community has not completely jettisoned the idea that men are financially responsible for their families. Well, I know that my wife hasn't. If somebody wants to help me with that, wants to talk to her and tell her about the modern view, I don't think you'll get very far. But so you do have situations in which men are assumed to, bear, more financial responsibility, and you have certain situations where that assumption is simply not true, and we should act, accordingly in these given situations. I don't think you have to change the furud. I don't think you have to change the shares that have been, declared by the Quran. Rather, you can make moves within the discretionary third, right? There's a discretionary third, right? So the Prophet ﷺ was once conversing with Sayyidina Abu Bakr, radiallahu anhu, and Sayyidina Abu Bakr was talking about his will. He was talking about, giving money. And he said that he was going to give a third of his inheritance, a third of his wealth in non-binding financial commitments. So these are commitments that aren't spelled out by the Quran, and there's no limit to them. You can give these kinds of commitments to any institution you want to, or any individual that you want to, or any cause that you want to. And the Prophet ﷺ allowed him to give from that discretionary third up to a third, right? Up to a third of what one plans to leave behind. Here, there's a difference of opinion. Some people say that you can give extra money within that third to some of your legitimate heirs. And some people say that the third should be given to people who are not your legitimate heirs. Seems as though we have an issue in our community where there is this issue with men and women and what kind of financial responsibility they take on. I advocate taking the position that suggests that we make everybody whole the way that we feel they need to be whole with that discretionary third. So for my daughters, who in terms of the what is okay, so another thing, when a person dies, the first thing that is done, right, and this is another controversial issue, the first thing that is normally done is that their debts are paid, right? They say Islam removes everything that preceded it, right, except debt, right? Even if you convert to Islam, you still have to pay your debt, right? So there's no way to get out of debt. Even if you change your name from Tony to Muhammad, and somebody says, "Yo, Tony, can I get my money?" It is not Islamic to say Muhammad does not owe you money. Tony owed you money, but I'm Muhammad now. But you still have to pay your debt, right? So any debts that a person might have, if their mahar has not been paid, or if they owe someone that's the first thing we do is we pay the debt. The second thing, the first thing we do is we usually liquidate all of the assets. All of the assets are liquidated, right? Which creates another problem. And that was the problem I alluded to just a couple of minutes ago. Um, if so, like, a wife who is married to a man who has children, either children by her or children with another woman, she would only technically get an eighth of his estate. Depending on the position one takes on life insurance and things of that nature, an eighth, and how much money you have, of course, an eighth wouldn't even be enough for many women to retain the marital home. Meaning, if the home was liquidated, she wouldn't even be able to, with an eighth, she wouldn't be able to seek a living arrangement in terms of her domicile that was maybe anything even remotely close to what she enjoyed with her husband, which brings up, another conversation about life insurance and things of that, things of that sort. But these are areas where we can use that discretionary third, right? We can take the opinion that we can use the discretionary third to make whole everything that we feel needs to be made whole that might not be covered through those Quranically mandated shares, right? So so you have that discretionary third, you have the Quranic, mandated shares, and that's pretty. I mean, that's pretty much it. There's a number of good, attorneys that you can seek their assistance. The inheritance in Arabic is called mirath, right? And the will, or like what you can, at your discretion determine concerning the wealth that you bequeath to your heirs, is called the wasiyah. So there's the will and there's the wasiyah. The wasiyah is not to exceed a third, because after a third, it's understood to be injurious or harmful to one's legitimate heirs potentially. Right? So are there any questions about that?
Yeah, I actually have a question. So, Bismillah. So in either of these groups, does it only cover Muslim relatives?
No, the mirath, or the inheritance, only covers Muslims, but the will, or the wasiyah, can be to anybody that you want.
All right, barakallah fik. Yeah, that's helpful.
Other questions? This usually generates some conversation. Ideas, questions. You guys can change the topic too. That was what I saw in terms of what people wanted to discuss. But if there's any other topic that is of interest, then mashallah, the floor is absolutely open, inshallah.
Yes, I know I picked this topic early on, so I have a few more questions. I'm curious about. Yeah. So in the will, other than financial stuff, what are stuff that are recommended to consider or to include?
I mean, wills are mostly financial, but other things of sentimental or monetary value that you want to go to certain people, right? So I want this person to take possession of this. I want this person to take possession of that. However, one has to remember that those things do constitute your wealth. So you have to make sure that you're not giving more than a third, because normally, if you didn't have a wasiyah, if you didn't have a will, all of that would be liquidated and it would just be divided among your heirs. It would just be, divided among the inheritors. So, if a person, like, for instance, has, a massive jewelry collection. Let's say somebody has, a collection of, jewelry of very precious stones, precious metals, or a person has a great art collection. If one forgets that this is wealth, and they're just thinking of it as something of sentimental value. And you say, I want the Hope diamond to go to my friend Ubayd. I want those two Van Goghs I have, and that one Monet I have to go to Ubayd. Those paintings, in terms of what they could fetch at auction, might be worth double, triple everything else that you're leaving to your, legitimate heirs. So you have to make sure that it's only a third, but objects like that, things of, sentimental or other kinds of value that you want certain people to take possession of, you can specify that in your will. Maybe a follow-up, inshallah? You have a follow-up question?
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering, because I don't know how to even approach this part, but I know some people include in their will maybe who will like wash them, where they'll be buried.
Yeah, from what I understand, that's a different kind of statement. It's not, the wasiyah, as I've learned about it, is a financial. It's a statement about material things, but I'm sure there's an accompanying document about who will where I want to be buried, who I want to wash me. I'm sure there's an accompanying document that one can make those things clear. And even engaging in that exercise. Talking about custody of your children, etc. It's a really sobering exercise, man. It forces you to move beyond kind of a theoretical relationship with dying, and it makes the entire thing just much more concrete, if that makes any sense. Much realer. So yeah, you can certainly include those things in a document as well. Other questions?
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. How are you?
I'm doing well, alhamdulillah. How about yourself?
Oh man, having some technical difficulty over here, man. But
you're hanging up your champ. You're a champ. We can all see and hear you, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. So this is when I think about the scope of problems that I could have, the Wi-Fi not working is minor.
Alhamdulillah. So I guess the follow-up on I honestly had never thought about how non-Muslim relatives would not be included. Is there any flexibility on that, or is there any discussion about that?
Yeah, no. Within a third of your wealth, so 1/3 of all of the worldly possessions you have, you can distribute that at your discretion to whomever you want, Muslim, non-Muslim, animals, causes, schools, not-for-profit organizations. So you have about a third, and the reason why a third is specified is that anything above that is seen as harmful to the heirs.
Okay, so yeah, so does that mean, I guess, who's the gatekeeper? Because let's say I have a family member that was born into a Muslim family but doesn't identify as Muslim, for example, or so what are or let's say someone is flirting with Islam but you never actually hear the shahada come out. Who is in the position to determine
and that's what I was gonna say. A lot of the when it comes to the inheritors that are specified in the Quran, they're relatively few. It's spouses, children, parents, siblings. it's not going beyond that, right? And it's only going to get to the level of siblings, parents, if there are no spouses or children. You see what I'm saying? But it's going to go spouses, children, parents, siblings. Beyond that, you don't really have much, specified by the Quran. Now, in terms of that other, so let's just to make it concrete, and I pray that Allah enriches all of you, inshallah, so that the number is actually much larger. But just for the sake of simple math, because there's a reason why I went to school to study Arabic and Islamic law, because math and science. No, but so for the sake of simple math, let's say a person dies leaving behind $100,000, right? They have 33 and a third, right? So they have $33,000 roughly that they can give to whomever they want, no matter what the status of their being Muslim, not being Muslim, if they left Islam, if they're inclined to Islam, if they're whatever, they have $33,000 with which they can do whatever they want. All right. The other $66,000, right, or $66,600, $66,630. I don't know, right? The other $66,600, they will be distributed among their heirs according to what is specified in the Quran. Does that make it more clear?
Yeah, that makes sense. Jazakallah khair.
Alhamdulillah. Other questions?
I have a non-will related question that somebody submitted. So I don't know before I change the topic if anybody wants to ask a question on the topic.
Go for it.
Okay. So the person is asking if being transgender is haram.
Okay, 1 second. Okay. So I think I heard the question. The person is asking if being transgender is haram. I'm not. I don't think that. I don't think that is the right approach to the question. If that makes, the person probably wants a yes or no answer. I think a matter like that is one that must be considered very carefully and very deeply. The idea of dysmorphia, we won't, I feel like even calling it dysmorphia places more of kind of an affective judgment on it than I intend to place, right? Let's say that one wants to alter the expression of their gender. I think that thinking about that in terms of the halal or haram of it is so secondary or tertiary, or I think it's there's so much that must be considered before we get there. Before is it halal, is it haram? If a person does do something like that, that certainly is no pretext for them to stop worshiping Allah. That's no pretext for them to stop practicing Islam. So if a person does have irreversible reassignment surgery, then many scholars say that at that point, they should commit to living as the gender to which they've been reassigned. I mean, what can you do, at that point. But before we get to that point, I think there's a lot of conversation that needs to be had. I do have some ideas about this issue, but I want to be sensitive, and I do recognize that any idea I have about it is the idea of someone that has never experienced anything even remotely as disorienting as feeling as though I'm in the wrong body. But I think there's a lot of ways to and this is standard practice. Even people that are considering gender reassignment, they have to go through years of interviews and evaluations and one-to-one relational meetings, just to be sure that this is something that they actually want to do and is not a momentary or fleeting feeling, right? And I think that in the religious context, the same degree of care and consideration and thoroughness would certainly be applied before somebody decides they want to undergo that kind of irreversible, surgical procedure. And then, this is something that appears sensible to me. This is something that appears now. Bear in mind, I'm talking about reassignment. I'm talking about reassignment. I'm not talking about cross-dressing or a person just living as the gender that they've chosen, while still anatomically being male or female. That is a different, that has an entirely different set of legal rulings attached to it. I'm talking about reassignment. I think that there are, in order to give a position on a case like that, one would have to, subhanAllah, I still find myself looking at the camera of my computer. The phone is leaning on my computer, and I'm looking up at the. I forget the camera is down here. That shows you how I'm programmed. I'm Zoom programmed, right? But I think a number of professional people, both within the psychiatric as well as medical and mental health fields. I said psychiatric, but would have to be pulled in to confer and to decide whether or not this reassignment is something good, admissible, or not. And I think that's the way you would have to deal with that. I don't think you can just give a one size fits all answer about a question as personal as that. But I do think this idea of reassignment being a process through which people, grow to accept themselves, I would like to see us as a Muslim community consider, a much wider range of options. It's telling, the idea that, okay, clearly there's a situation here in which the mind and the body are not in alignment. I don't know why it would seem easier to change the body than to change the mind. But this is just coming from a simpleton. This is coming from someone who, who has very, very superficial knowledge about, that kind of, that kind of disorientation. But it's like, okay, if the mind and the body are misaligned, why is the recourse simply to change the body? Why not change the mind? I don't know. But in any event, yeah, I think people much more knowledgeable about that process than I would have to confer about how they will help to get this person in alignment, to get their body in alignment with their self-image and their mind and all of that. In terms of somebody cross-dressing, someone that does not, intend to change their anatomical gender surgically, but rather is dressing in a manner that is characteristic of a person of another gender expression. That act is something that is prohibited by Islamic law. That act of cross-dressing is itself haram. But even then, to talk about that act, putting is such a this is an expression of something much deeper. It's not just about dressing in drag, or a woman dressing as a butch top dyke or something like this. This is an expression of deeper issues of that misalignment that I spoke of earlier, and I think it should be treated the same way. So I probably, when thinking about that question, I probably would respond with a language of consideration, compassion, and interest in helping this person, more than I would respond with a language of legality, permissibility, and permissibility. I think that the former tool, compassion, consideration, care, genuine love, for a person in such a circumstance, serves us much better than thinking about legality and permissibility and impermissibility, etc. I don't know if that makes it clear, or maybe you had a follow-up.
I don't see a follow-up yet, but I'll get back to you if there's one that's submitted.
Summer, help me. Summer, help me. I don't know what I'm talking about. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I understand. I think you addressed it. I think the main thing is to keep the main thing, which is that I think one of the problems is that people feel, what's the word? Ostracized from the community, or ostracized from their right or entitlement to being Muslims, or fully practicing, owning their relationship with Allah and with Islam.
And they have to continue doing that, no matter what happens with that question of gender identity and expression. You're still a Muslim,
Yeah, and I think there's a big cultural and emotional, if we look at priorities or fiqh al-awlawiyat, like there's a priority in fiqh, even for example, like let's say salah or prayer, like the obligatory prayer, and leaving that is a clear cut bigger sin than some of those other areas that people might kind of ask about, other areas of, identity or sexual orientation or gender orientation. But I think, unfortunately, I feel like culturally and socially, sometimes there's a bigger taboo and stigma, which, part of wisdom in Islam as well is not only know what to say, but know what not to say. And I think sometimes people might want to, in general, I'm not saying the situation, but in general, there might be something that a Muslim might see as being haram or halal. But speaking about it to a person might actually push them further away from the truth in Islam, or push them towards something that might be a bigger harm. So, I mean, I don't know. I think something that came to mind was one of the stories that you shared actually at one point when you were a new Muslim or a young Muslim, and
wait, hold on, stop. I'm still a young Muslim. What are you implying here?
No, I mean last year, just a year younger. No, when you were in high school. I think you were mentioning about kind of and I hope you don't mind, I think you shared this in this class, but going to prom and somebody didn't tell you, oh, don't go to prom. There's like questionable stuff about it. You know, you're going with a girl, you know, all these matters, and kind of even if this person was knowledgeable in Islam, realizing that you are on a path moving closer to Allah. So in itself, you're moving in that direction. So just him trying to embrace you and create a sense of belonging and talk to you, you know, dignify who you are in your journey. But also realizing that, you know, when it comes to creed and aqidah, you were on that path getting closer. So again, I'm not very knowledgeable again in this area. Even if I'm in the mental health field, I think there's an intersecting area of like mental health and, you know, support, but also a religious area, which I'm not versed well in as well. But I think the questions coming as haram and halal, I think, like you said, is going back to where's this person's journey in terms of the relationship with Allah.
I don't think it would be useful to like halal. It's like if a person is talking about, you know, their kind of the expression of their gender, it's like, okay, we're way past halal and haram here. You know what I'm saying? We're talking about, you know, deeper questions of self-worth, identity, personality, personhood, which is different than personality. And I think that the person needs, you know, clearly they need some help, some kind of help. We don't know exactly what kind of help, you know, to feel that those things are aligned for them, right? And I don't think, you know, giving them a legal ruling will be much help at all. You know, I think that in fact could be quite destructive if a person and you just say, okay, it's hot. Now, could you imagine if a person is really considering questions that large and then someone says, well, it's haram. You say, okay, well, in that case, you know, I mean, I don't feel any of this confusion that I'm feeling. I mean, after you told me it was haram, it was all solved for me. No, that's completely improbable. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of factors involved when it comes to even how somebody identifies, like who they are, you know, different aspects of their identity. But I think specifically when it comes to gender and sexual, there's like biological, there's social, there's emotional, there's like a lot of factors, some that we might know about, some that we might not know about. So I feel like it can be destructive sometimes to give an answer without understanding a person's whole context. But
and
I think,
and it's easy, and a lot of it's easier said than done. I mean, the simpleton in me immediately jumps to self-love, you know, embracing even, I mean, you know, I'm not even speaking in the context of morality. So we're not talking about what's halal and haram with regard to one's sexuality and, you know, what I like men, I mean, I'm a woman, or I'm not thinking about that at all right now. I'm just saying, just appreciating you in all of your uniqueness, no matter what society says masculinity or femininity should look like. If that makes any, I mean, I know that if somebody is experiencing that struggle, that doesn't mean much to them. But like I said, to someone that maybe is looking at this in a bit of a superficial way, you know, embracing who you are in all of your uniqueness, and working from there in terms of your spirituality, your personhood, in terms of your relationship with Allah, but working from a basis of, appreciating who you are, I think that for me, that's always a good basis. I do recommend a book called The Madness of Crowds by Douglas Murray. I read that book a couple of months ago, and I think that he takes on the question of transgenderism in a really interesting way. The Madness of Crowds by Douglas Murray, who is a gay, conservative British writer. So put all that together and you got something really interesting. You got something really interesting. So it was a good book. But at one point he does talk about different people that were considering reassignment deciding against it because no matter what they were, they just wanted to embrace what they were, right? So.
And this is Zaina over here. If I can just kind of chime in,
Yes,
I don't
please.
have obviously an answer, but I'll just kind of disclose my background. So I'm an endocrinologist. I practice in Canada, but I actually, within my training, I worked with people with transgender who are transgender. So just I can maybe bring in the medical perspective of how it looks, just so we can have a deeper understanding and appreciation to the complexity. But in general, and practices differ, my role was to start gender affirming or hormone affirming kind of treatment. And typically our standards were kind of exactly what you've said. It's really a whole journey. And we did mandate at that time that people work with psychiatrists, not any psychiatrists, but people who actually specialize in transgender medicine for minimum 1 year. And only when the psychiatrist feels that this is a formal diagnosis and they work through it, then and only then do we as endocrinologists get the referral and the clearance that they're good to go for hormone therapy. Then we do our medical assessment and then we take it from there. And you know, I think the angle that I've seen from transgender from a medical perspective is I've appreciated, because I've reviewed those psychiatrist notes, that it is a very complicated journey and it touches on many of the aspects that you've mentioned. And so I've come to understand, appreciate, and be really empathetic and really understand that it's so superficial, obviously, and anti-Islamic to discriminate against people or treat them differently because of this when we lack understanding. So I just echo what you mentioned about empathy and understanding, and usually there's a deeper sense of belonging. And many people that I've worked with in all ages, you know, in their 20s up until their 50s, at times, you know, we do medical clearance more than anything and counsel on side effects and so on. And some people, again, like you said, choose not to go for it. So it's a very complicated decision, I should say, and it's not for any layman or public person to weigh in on. Just like somebody has diabetes, you don't go and tell them, don't eat this and don't do that. You go see a specialist and you get the formal knowledge.
No, Jazakallah khair. I think that is exactly what I'm trying to express. That, you know, this is a very, very complicated journey. And I can only imagine the difficulty and the pain of someone wanting to change something about them that is so fundamental to who they are, and the confusion. And, you know, I think my job is just to try to be as empathetic as possible and really to, you know, if this is a person that identifies with the message of Islam, to continue guiding them, you know, in their relationship with Allah through that process. Because no matter what one chooses with regard to that question, you know, the responsibility of being a decent person and being committed and devoted and making, one's life an act of service to the divine, that obligation still stands. And so, you know, we're here to assist people with that. You know what I'm saying? No matter what they choose with regard to those other things. Alhamdulillah. Other perspectives, ideas?
So I have another question from somebody going back to the subject of wills. That's actually a very interesting question. So on the non-financial side, is there a preference or priority when it comes to custody of the child if both parents pass away?
I don't know. I'd have to review that. I wish I think the mother's next of kin. I think the mother's next of kin. Or is it the father's next of kin? You guys are gonna send me back into the books. I'm actually sitting at my desk, but not in my library. So no, it's either the mother's next of kin or father's next of kin, which is not saying much. I think that's pretty obvious. That's not saying much. I think that's pretty obvious that it's the mother's next of kin or father's next of kin. But I don't remember. I don't remember. You know, it might be one of those issues in which people differ. You know, usually on issues of child custody, you'll find that some people lean in the direction of the father and the father's next of kin because the children, you know, fathers are seen as kind of gateways to material provision. And so that, if and this is a very patriarchal, unapologetic, this is a very patriarchal reading of kind of non-domestic issues in Muslim majority societies, that because fathers are, the means of financial support for children, the father's family will assume that responsibility on his behalf very easily. Whereas because women and mothers are seen as beneficiaries of financial support, that might be perceived as like, it's assumed that it will not be, that additional responsibility of the children will not be embraced as easily. But that's not always true. But this might be one of those areas in which scholars differ. Yeah. But I can review and get back to you, certainly, inshallah. Other things. What are you guys thinking about, man? We have about 8 more minutes, inshallah. We had just a brief 1-hour conversation. I'll try to be on time next week. But what's going on, man? How many people are vaccinated, man? We want to get back into space.
So I'm still thinking about the transgender discussion, which I thoroughly appreciated, both Samad and the doctor that chimed in, and obviously always Sheikh, your insights. It was interesting how you said that the scholars are fairly, and I don't want to misquote you, but it sounds like it's pretty established that if the person has undergone gender reassignment surgery, then like they should just commit to living as a Muslim in that gender. But I guess like, and everyone has already kind of touched on this, that there are a lot of reasons why a person may or may not undergo a surgery, but sometimes even it's not a choice, right? Like all of that requires a certain degree of privilege. Like you need to have access to medical care. You need to have the resources available to you. You need to be perhaps in a geographic location that these, I mean, I went to Mississippi. There's one abortion clinic in the entire state of Mississippi. Like there's only so many services because of what's socially acceptable in a geographic location. So perhaps someone would, if given the ability, would undergo the surgery, but there are other controlling factors that prevent them from doing so. So having the surgery being the gatekeeper for which we just Islamically, or I'm not saying anybody is coming down definitively on that, but that seems not right, because there are all these
because it's kind of controlled by privilege, access to health care, and a number of other socioeconomic factors and geographical factors, and yes, I mean the all of this. See, there's two competing issues, Ella, that scholars are considering, Islamic legal scholars are considering with regard to this question. One is people are entitled to dignified treatment and privacy. It is never okay. So if I saw someone that was presenting as a woman praying in the women's section, at no point would I ask them a question about their actual genitalia. That's never okay, right? There are all kinds of people that look many different ways, right? So the idea that anybody is going to be put on trial before the community, are you really a woman? Are you really a man? Are you really that is never permissible. It's it's not only inappropriate to ask questions like that run the risk of hurting or harming people, is haram. On the other hand, we know that we have a tradition, right? We have a religious tradition that does have certain rules and regulations that in which gender is affective, meaning like, something as simple as, how we arrange for prayer, and so, all of the rulings about, cross-dressing, or about, presenting as, a gender expression that differs from one's anatomical gender, is about preserving kind of the sanctity of those lines that make those rulings relevant. But to your point, I don't think those rulings are about people that are really grappling with their identity. I think those rulings are isolating just the practice of, a brother going among women who cover their hair from men as a man pretending to be a woman so that he can see their hair. Something a little more simple and something a little less involved. A lot of the rulings about, cross-dressing and things of that nature, I think the scenarios that they envision are like scenarios like that one. Not so much scenarios where a person is really grappling with their identity and who they are. I think that's just a whole order of magnitude deeper. I'm looking up at my computer camera. I think that's just a whole order of magnitude deeper than what the rulings about cross-dressing and things like that, suggest. What the rulings about, and this is what I think modern Muslims have some difficulty understanding, is that, the idea of preserving public modesty through some level of gender segregation. This is something that up until very, very recently was a part of, almost an indisputable part of American life, whether it was bathrooms or gym rooms or locker rooms, and it's still very much a part of American social life, right? You have the same thing in Islamic law, with perhaps a little more emphasis on some of that public modesty through gender segregation, and people confusing those lines runs contrary to that, I think, desirable social value. In terms of people really wrestling with their expression of who they are, I think that's just a deeper thing. And I just think that, those people should not be questioned or interrogated or investigated. But you do have things that happen. And so it's a very, needless to say, these instances are challenges to community. Some of those challenges I've seen, up front. These are instances in which love is tested. Love is tested. I've seen women uncomfortable praying in a section of the masjid, the women's section of the masjid, because someone knew that a person back there was wearing a full face veil, but they knew that person was an anatomical, man, male, or had, male sex organs, or, however one wants to express that. And this became a big thing, so it's, these are places where love is tested. But to answer your question succinctly, those rulings that talk about impermissibility, I think they're talking about a much simpler thing than like a quest for personal identity, if that makes any sense.
No, that definitely makes sense. Jazakallah khair.
Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair. So mashallah, we've come to 7. We'll try to get in at 6:50 promptly next week, unless the time really, really moves even. We'll figure something. Maybe I have to talk to I forget my sister's name, Sana, and see about maybe even rescheduling. But For next week, we'll tentatively 5:50 inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wal-'asr. إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. آمين يا رب.